Hi, and welcome to One Decision in Brief. I'm Christina Ruffini, joined today, of course, by my co-host, Sir Richard Dearlove. Today, we're going to be talking about the cuts at the U.S. Department of State, France boosting its military spending, and what the tariff trade war from the U.S. means for foreign policy.
If it's not done, if we don't have an agreement in 50 days, that's what we're doing, secondary tariffs, and they're biting.
Let's take a listen. Sir Richard, how are you?
I'm very well, Christina. How are you?
Less fun here in D.C. this week. I think the big news was, first of all, these massive 15% cuts at the State Department. There were these really tearful scenes of, people who've worked there their whole careers and just getting these notices. They kind of went out, in tears and with tears, to be frank. I was checking on folks throughout the day who were just, devastated. And obviously they had their colleagues gathered in the lobby and kind of did a clap out as they were leaving. I just want to discuss, what your thoughts are on it. And then especially from like an operability standpoint, how it impacts things like just what the U.S. tries to do overseas, morale, intelligence gathering, any of that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, to do a cut that size in one go without asking for voluntary redundancies, which I guess they were not, is quite a big deal because it cuts your capability. And I'm sure there are lots of people in specific areas who have terrific expertise, like some of the aid programs. I know a lot of those were cut, but there will be all sorts of speciality knowledge that they're going to lose. And it's a brutal thing to do, particularly if you're getting rid of people who've worked there for like 30 years plus, 20, 30 years.
They also didn't do it, my understanding is they didn't do it based on individuals or talent. They just did it based on, okay, we're cutting this department. We're going to keep two people. We'll keep the two people with the most seniority. So it wasn't very targeted. And, one example is the Diplomatic Security Service, which is like the secret service for the State Department. When the Secretary of State gets off the plane, you see all these security guys. People always say it's his secret service. It's actually not. It's a different branch. Since I've covered that place for almost 8 years now, they've had their own kind of communications office that can, answer specific questions because they have a specific expertise. That entire department has been cut out. So it's like a lot of these civil service, kind of the middle management, the glue that keeps these offices together, this administration just doesn't have a lot of use for, and they're getting rid of them. And more, it's just getting centralized under a few people.
Yeah, it's extraordinary. I think they'll probably discover in due course and pretty quickly that they've suddenly got holes that no one's filling. And I mean, things like, people who specialize in the security of embassies. Okay, you've got that program where you have Marine Guards and detachments stationed in embassies, but there's much more additional stuff to that. And I just wonder how seriously they take that. For example, I mean, embassies overseas, particularly in hostile countries, are always under threat from intelligence penetration. They're looking at all the staff, they're scrutinizing them. And people who understand all of that and brief the staff, look after all that side of things, it's really complicated. So I'm pretty shocked to hear that some of that's been peeled away, probably by people who don't really understand the complexity of running some of these operations.
And the other thing is that a lot of the people I've spoken to have said they cannot perform the function that I perform or my department performs with the amount of people they now have. So what a lot of them are doing are going to the private sector subcontractors and saying, hey, do you want to hire me? They're going to need somebody to do this, with the theory that they're then going to charge the US government more money to do the exact function they were doing before. So for all this cost cutting, saving measures, public-private partnerships, it's probably going to end up costing them more to do things like build embassies because they fired the person who was putting in the, the duct system and the security system, all that stuff is just going to come back and end up costing them more money in the long run, I think.
For example, you put your finger on something really important, which is, the construction work which goes on inside embassies, which has to be done by secure contractors being flown out from the United States. Then all the supplies have to be brought out specially because you don't want, some guy trying to infiltrate microphones in if you buy your supplies locally. And that's even in countries which are reasonably I wouldn't say friendly, but are not hostile. Let's put them in the middle. And, that whole business of building safe speech rooms, all sorts of complicated things, having your right type of secure communications, maintaining all the machines, I mean, there's so many aspects that people don't understand about embassy life.
These are the guys like shoveling coal into the engine to make sure the ship is moving forward, while different administrations and different captains keep swapping out. And they've been really dismissive of this middle management group, and now they're just plain dismissing them. And I think it could be a problem, but we'll see.
I think it'll be problematic, and I think you're right. They'll be hired out as contractors and charge a hell of a lot more.
And speaking of spending money, so France has announced that it's going to really increase its military spending. It's going to spend 7.6 billion over the next 2 years. Macron said, "You have to be feared in this world, and to be feared, you have to be strong." France, of course, is the only country in the EU that has nuclear capabilities, and the announcement was made, as we were just talking about, on Bastille Day. What's your take on this? I think this seems like one of the few good things to come out of Trump's foreign policy is Europe's desire to take control of its own security. But I'm curious what your take is.
Well, it was inevitable. The French have actually been quite slow in upping their defence budget, particularly in response to what the Germans have done. So I think 7.5 billion, which he announced, may take it eventually up to somewhere near 5%. And of course, he's just been on a state visit to London. Not much came out of that. But one important thing did come out, which was an agreement for the French and British nuclear programs to have a closer relationship, because the UK's strategic nuclear capability has been oriented, of course, towards its American suppliers. But it means a new level of coordination with the French. And that's actually unprecedented in a way, because the French have this concept, or they've always clung to it. It's rather false, saying tout azimut, I mean, i.e., all targets, but in practice they are really, a nuclear-armed NATO member country. So they're coming to terms with the reality, and this so-called French independence is really being pushed to one side. So it's quite significant in terms of the theory and also the practice. So it's a big move. It's a big move. And of course, the relationship with the UK is really important, because the two primary defence powers in Europe are, until the Germans build up, which they're some distance from doing, it's France and the UK.
What does it mean operationally, tangentially? Like, what does it really mean that they're going to work closer together? Is there anything specific that you expect to come out of that, or just better coordination?
Well, I think there is, because the UK is about to buy this version of the F-35, which can deliver tactical nuclear weapons, which is a big departure for British nuclear weapons policy, because we've only had a strategic deterrent. The French already have their own short range, the smaller weapons capability, which is aircraft delivered. So I think you can imagine that these tactical weapons, there's going to be a degree of Anglo-French coordination, and then it may well be that there's some degree of integrated targeting when it comes to strategic capability, which of course is submarine carried for both countries. But actually, interestingly, the French, I was looking this up recently, I think have a slightly greater number of warheads than the UK does. Actually, I've always been a great believer in Anglo-French military cooperation. And having been responsible in my career for the intelligence capability and working closely with the French, who were great partners and with whom we had a very, very high level of trust, it's really returning almost to anti-status quo, because it used to be a bit like that. We were driven apart by Macron's rather absurd Euro military ambitions, which I think he's quietly forgetting about now, and he's becoming more realistic in, as it were, the strategic defence of Europe. And if that's the case, then the obvious natural partner is the UK.
I think we need to talk about the Trump tariff trade wars, which continue. Now we've announced a 50% tariff on Brazil, 36% on Thailand. Canada's still at 35. Mexico's at 30. It is just such an uncertain mess. I think one of the reasons is it's so uncertain that no one is really moving because they just don't know what to do. Mexico has said they think there's still room for negotiation. So has Canada. What is your take here? And at some point, doesn't all this start to really impact other foreign policy objectives?
Well, of course it does. I just don't think people realize what the knock-on effects might and could be as this reverberates through the global trading system. I'm intrigued to see where he ends up, negotiating with the EU. The EU are devils to negotiate with, as we discovered, or they're very difficult. But, Trump seems to have lost patience and said, 30%, having said that the tariffs would be lower. And I don't know whether you've read the text of the letter that he wrote to the EU. It's absolutely unbelievable. It's actually quite funny. And it's like an imperial order issued from Rome, in the latter days of the Roman Empire. But look, Trump's clearly not just prepared to pursue this quite far, but use it politically, like trying to get the Brazilians to drop the court case against Bolsonaro, which is, I think, a sort of fascinating side product of his tariff policy. And where he is with the Chinese, I just don't get. There has been this negotiation which actually took place in London. And it would suggest that it was reasonably successful if they're down to 10%, but I don't think anything's sure. We're still throwing darts at the board. Come on, let's face it, it's unresolved.
But the other problem with them is if there were a cohesive strategy, China does cheat, right? And this has been a problem and it has damaged the US economy. That's all valid arguments. But there has to be a back end strategy to this. A factory is not just going to appear in time to make up for that supply chain hole. And there is no other policy other than, as you said, let's throw some darts at the board. And that's what, when I talk to economists, that's what they find really infuriating is this is not how you do this. Even if these are the goals you want to achieve, this is just not the way to get it done.
Yeah, well, take your Dooney and Burke lovely handbags. They used to be manufactured in China, I believe. They're now manufactured in Vietnam. And, there's a whole issue of how the tariff policy is going to work. I think Vietnam's on 30% at the moment, but they're still negotiating.
The other strangeness to this is if you are looking for folks to come up with an alternative to China, that's why a lot of businesses had moved to Vietnam. And when I covered the last Trump administration, I think Pompeo made maybe 5 or 6 visits there. I personally was on the plane where we went at least 3 times. And they were really courting Vietnam as both an economic alternative to China and a strategic military partner in the region. And it just seems so counterintuitive, especially since so many businesses tried to hedge their bet and move their operations to Vietnam, that they're now struck with one of these higher tariffs when they've really not, that I am aware of, done anything antagonistic towards the U.S. to kind of merit this.
The one that I think puzzles all of us in the extreme, given the closeness of the two countries, is Canada. My God, what on earth what are the Canadians thinking at this point in time?
I can tell you what they're thinking because I talked to them, both folks in government and outside. They're just really pissed off. It's kind of amusing almost to watch a Canadian get that angry because it takes a lot. But they just feel like they've been really good neighbors for a really long time. They've had our backs in different conflicts, and we share so many Air Force and NORAD and NORTHCOM, operations, and it's just baffling to them and really upsetting.
It'll be very, very interesting to see what happens to Trump in the midterms, because is this damaging him politically or not? There must be so many sort of sensible Americans who are scratching their heads wondering what the hell's going on.
Sir Richard, thank you so much for joining me.
Okay, Christina, great talking to you.
That's it for this week's One Decision in Brief, but of course, be sure to stay tuned for our regularly scheduled episode this Thursday. And for exclusive content with world leaders, visit onedecision.com and our YouTube page. I'm Christina Ruffini. Thanks for listening.